Raw Power is Italy's most legendary hardcore band. They have been a band since 1981, and I have a small part in their history, having produced 2 albums for them. So I'm going to go back to the year 1984, which is 41 years ago, incredibly. I was living in San Francisco, actually with Lori Black, who would later go on to be in the Melvins. And I had a little record label that I'd started called Alchemy Records. And we were going out and seeing bands play. We saw all kinds of great bands that came through there at the time. And one of the bands that came through San Francisco in 1984 was the aforementioned Raw Power from Italy. Now, I didn't even really know that Italy had hardcore bands. I kind of understood that maybe there was a scene going on there. Maximum Rock and Roll, the Bay Area newspaper about all things punk rock, had a scene report from a variety of European countries. Somebody would submit a report about what kind of bands were coming up. And so Raw Power was on my radar a little bit. And we saw they were coming to San Francisco. And so we thought, well, we've got to go see this hardcore band from Italy. First of all, they managed to come all the way from Italy to play. So we went to the show, and Raw Power started playing, and they were a really interesting looking band because they had a guy in their band who looked like a straight up metal guy. And at the time, usually the divisions were pretty deep between metal and punk rock or hardcore bands. There wasn't quite the crossover thing happening yet. So in retrospect, Raw Power were kind of a pioneer of this type of thing. But anyway, their guitar player, Davide Devote, was completely dressed in black, had kind of longer hair. He might have even been playing a white Stratocaster or something. And he had white shoes on, which was kind of amazing. He was completely dressed in black, black pants, black shirt, black leather jacket, black shoulder-length hair, and these white slip-on shoes. And I remember Lori just staring at him and going, "He's got white loafers on. That's amazing." And we were going, yes, that is kind of amazing and interesting. And what was more amazing was when the band started playing, the kind of solos that he was playing were just like Yngwie Malmsteen over this completely hardcore punk rock band. And if any of you out there know who Yngwie is, he basically started playing Paganini riffs on the guitar. Paganini was a 19th century Italian violinist who supposedly made a deal with the devil so he could play amazingly. Davide could actually play like this. And that's no mean feat because you have to practice like crazy to be able to play this style of music. But to have these sorts of guitar solos in the middle of a hardcore band just seemed really odd and kind of had a sort of cognitive dissonance thing going on. And I remember watching it and just going, what's wrong with this? It seems completely insane. But we really enjoyed the show, and I think maybe we even talked to the band a little bit. I seem to remember talking to Davide, I think, and just going, man, you are an amazing player. And he was, grazie, thank you so much, and very kind of humble. And I understood what it took to become a guitar player like that. After this tour ended for Raw Power, and I think it was their first American tour, they went back to Italy, and I think they recorded the album Screams from the Gutter, which became a really successful album. I think it ended up selling maybe 40 or 50,000 copies or something like that, which is a lot for a hardcore band in 1984. And we bought the record, or maybe I think we had it on a cassette. And sure enough, it was filled with guitar solos by Davide, and you can listen to some of those, and they are outstanding and crazy and still sound pretty wild next to a straight up hardcore band. So the only way that you could find out about music like this was basically by reading scene reports in Maximum Rock and Roll, as I mentioned before. And so they were writing about all kinds of interesting bands like The Exploited and GBH from the UK, One Way System, BGK from Holland, and a lot of other bands that were part of little punk rock and hardcore scenes all around the planet. So Raw Power continued putting records out. I kind of lost track of them a little bit. And then, of course, I was busy with my own label, Alchemy Records, at that time in the 80s. And as the 80s started to draw to a close, I found myself leaving San Francisco to move to London in 1988. I got in touch with John Loder, who was running Southern Studios there, and just kind of tried to explain to him my position with Alchemy Records, how I'd left the label, I wasn't going to be involved in it anymore. And he said, well, that was too bad. And I think in the same conversation, he asked me, would I be interested in producing a record with the Italian band Raw Power? If you take a look around my channel, you'll see that there is actually a YouTube video all about Alchemy Records and the history of that, talking about some of the records we put out, and my partner Victor Hayden. Anyway, take a look at that if you want to check out more information about that label I had in the mid-80s. So we've been doing a series of art drops related to the content that I've been providing here, mainly about music, and Jennifer's been doing some incredible paintings, all of which have sold out. So what we have this week is this painting, which is inspired by the Italian theme of this week's video. So Atlas, while usually holding up the world with his strength, is now using even more strength to hold up the heaviest 4x12 in existence. We're going to put it in the shop, and good luck getting it because there is only one of these. So here's a sketch that happened before the painting, and once again there will be only one of these. So jump on it before it leaves. So John Loder had asked me about producing Raw Power, and a bell rang in my head, and I went, okay, of course I know who that band is. And sure, I'd be interested in doing it. And he said, well, I've got an arrangement to do a record with them. They're going to be coming to London to do the record, and you'd actually be doing a favor for me because you could just produce it and I won't have to worry about it because I know you've produced records before and you know how to do that. So we kind of set the whole thing up, and Raw Power came to London. We started working on this record right here, which is Mine to Kill, and we did it at Southern Studios in London. So this was kind of the first time I was actually going to be meeting them, spending time with them. I didn't go, hey, do you guys remember me or anything like that? But they did know about some of the Alchemy records that I'd produced, and they were fans of that stuff, so that made it kind of a nice thing. And we were working with an engineer called Harvey Burrell, who was a house engineer at Southern. This was the first time I met him, and he was a super nice guy. Also, what was interesting was I think Southern had a couple of studios there. In the studio next to us, a band called the Revolting Cocks was actually making a record. And of course, that is Al Jorgensen from Ministry's band. So that was the very first time I met Al. And at the time, Al had a short crew cut that was dyed blonde and was all dressed in black. He was kind of doing his industrial goth thing. And I'd never heard of Revolting Cocks, and I just went, okay, that's a catchy name. You're probably going to go somewhere with that name. Anyway, he was super nice. The band was nice. I think maybe it was just him mainly, with other people doing overdubs and stuff, but my memory's a little rusty on that. So they came in and we started setting everything up and getting tones and stuff like that. I had not actually heard one note of anything that they were going to record. I think maybe they had some rehearsal cassettes to listen to. that were pretty terribly recorded. It was just kind of like, we've got a cassette recorder, we're throwing a tape in it, and we've got the songs down, and this is what we're doing. So I was hearing the material for the first time in the studio. First of all, the founding members of the band were Mauro and Giuseppe Codalupe. They were brothers, and they were the two original members from 1981. So they'd had an endless kind of revolving door policy with band members. Just whenever they felt like making a record or going on a tour, they would just put a band together and do that. So the people who were playing on this record were, they had a drummer named Fabiano, a bass player called Alessandro, and they had Davide playing lead guitar and Giuseppe playing rhythm guitar, and Mauro was the singer. So Giuseppe was a straight up hardcore punk rock guitar player, just 100 miles an hour, blazing rhythm guitar. And Davide was, as I mentioned before, this highly sophisticated and intricate lead guitar player playing Yngwie Malmsteen's style guitar riffs. So right away there was this huge dichotomy that became even more apparent as we started tracking. And I was thinking to myself, well, is this going to be metal? Is it going to be more hardcore? And we had discussions about it. And when both of them were playing rhythm guitar together, it just sounded kind of like a mess. And so I kept trying to figure out which direction they wanted to go in. As producer, do you want it more articulate, or do you want it more kind of like a wall of sound type of thing? And they were sort of non-committal about it. And they were going, well, whatever you think is best. And of course I was going, okay, I'm not sure exactly what's best. So started just throwing tracks up, doing different mixes, and I was kind of leaning more towards the metal thing because the drumming was more metal style drumming, and so it seemed to just lock in a little bit better with Davide and the drummer kind of closer together. And so that's the direction that we went in. And of course later I was thinking, well, it was kind of missing something because Giuseppe's guitar was down a little bit in the mix, and while it did have this more articulated thing happening, in retrospect it was kind of missing that wall of sound thing. But anyway, that's kind of the direction that I picked, and in the end it does sound very metal when you listen to it. It's got this sort of articulated thing going on with more or less a kind of punk rock guitar thing, kind of filling out the space in between the metal articulation. So anyway, that's the way that got mixed and came out. Everybody seemed to be happy with it at the time, although I think maybe there was a little grumbling later about how maybe the spirit of Raw Power was somewhat attenuated in that. And as a producer, that's on me. But it is a successful record for what it does. So Mind to Kill came out in 1989. And I think it was pretty successful, although people didn't like it quite as much as Screams from the Gutter and some previous stuff because it wasn't quite hardcore enough. I think I even remember maybe a review in Maximum Rock and Roll where they said, yeah, this is a little too metal for them. But basically everything was too metal for Maximum Rock and Roll, so I didn't lose too much sleep over that. So let's fast forward to 1992. I'm living in London. I have a job working at a organic food suppliers. I'm working in a warehouse and I'm filling 50-kilo bags filled with granola, basically. That's what I'm doing. I'm going through the warehouse with a forklift. I'm picking up the ingredients. I'm taking it up to the hopper, dumping the ingredients in the hopper, and mixing all that up. And then I'm going downstairs and I'm filling up 50-kilo bags full of granola. That's my job. And I'm trying to do stuff music-wise at the same time. And I get a call from Raw Power. They get in touch with me, I think once again through Southern, and they want to talk to me about doing another record. So they had such a great time the first time that they called me up and said, "Oh, you should come to Italy and make this record." And I thought, yeah, I should go to Italy and make this record, and it'll be really fun, no matter what, because these guys are great to make a record with. It's just a cool thing to do. If you can go to Italy to make a record, I recommend it. So the arrangements are made. I go down to Italy. I go to Pisa, and the place where the studio is a little town outside of Pisa called Cacina, and it's a tiny little sort of spa town, I think. They have people go there to take the waters, or else it's right next to a town where people take the waters. So the studio is in kind of a rundown farmhouse that is being refurbished by a guy named Ovi, and this is his dream project. And so they have all the gear in there. So this studio is in the middle of a field of sunflowers, and when you're driving into it, there's all these tall sunflowers, like 6 or 8 feet tall. You drive down this little dirt road going down to this farmhouse that was maybe built in the 18th century or something like that. So every day we drove through this field of sunflowers to get to this studio, and it was great. It was a really cool thing to kind of uplift your spirits on your way in to get ready to work. So every day we would drive to the studio and get there for 10 or 11 or something like that, ready to work. And I didn't realize that we were working on Italian time. And I was thinking, okay, we're going to walk in there, we're going to start working right away. So I would get to the studio, and it would be me and Alessandro sitting around, and I would just be looking at my watch, kind of going, yeah, okay, so they're half an hour late. And this is before cell phones. It's 1992. Nobody has a cell phone. 45 minutes would go by. I'd be kind of looking at the clock, making another espresso, sitting around. Okay, now an hour's late. Okay, maybe we should call somebody, see if everything's okay. Make a phone call. Oh yeah, we're going to be there soon. We're just getting ready. Yeah, it's great. Can't wait to do this. Okay. All right. So after about an hour and a half, somebody shows up. After about 2 hours, now the whole band is here. Okay, this is great. I'm completely jacked up on espresso at this point, going, all right, let's get to work. And they're kind of laughing and going, okay, so maybe lunch? I don't know. What do you think? And I'm going, yeah, maybe lunch or whatever. Okay, this sounds great. We'll drive down the road to the local trattoria, and yeah, we'll get some lunch going, and this will be great. And I'm going, yeah, this will be great. It's great. It's really good. And I just didn't realize I just needed to take it easy. I needed to just be relaxed about it. So it took me a couple of days to get into Italian time. And then once I got into Italian time, I realized this is the best way to make a record, is basically take your time getting there, you relax, get some food in you, maybe relax a little bit more, and then you're really ready to go. And then when you are ready to go, about 3.5 hours after you were initially ready to go, then you start working in a very relaxed manner. And then you work till like 11 o'clock at night or something like that. And you're relaxed the whole time. And it's really quite a wonderful way to work and really stress-free. I recommend it to anybody. So the biggest difference between doing this record in 1992 with them and doing the one I did in 1988 was this was effectively a residential type of situation in Italy. In London, it was basically get in there, you've got a certain amount of time, get out, and then you've got a London commute each way. and they're in a foreign country. They're staying in hotels. We didn't get to hang out at all. So I can't honestly say I got to know them very well during that first record, apart from just sort of working very diligently to try and get it done within a certain amount of time. And then it was just like, okay, see you later. I'm not even sure that we shared a meal together that first time. And so going to Italy was completely 180 degrees different. Everybody was at home, more or less, as far as like being in the country at least. And so we were basically eating all of our meals together and hanging out together. And this was really cool because I really became friends with them while we were doing that. And we spent a lot of time laughing about all kinds of stuff. And of course, they're Italian, so that was their first language. I didn't speak Italian at all. But their English was pretty good. I mean, it was far better than my Italian, certainly, but they taught me a few things here and there. And Giuseppe, in particular, was such an amazing character. Sadly, he passed away in 2002. That was really a great experience being able to get to know him, because I could see how he really was the spirit of raw power and such an anarchic and hilarious person. And to hear all of the things that he used to say coming out of him with this really strong Italian accent just never made me stop laughing every time. And when he could see this happening, the reaction that he was getting from me, he'd always be cracking me up. He had this thing that he used to say all the time, which was really hilarious. I mean, he was basically a family guy, just a regular middle-class Italian businessman, I think he ran a video shop. That's mainly what he did. He was a manager of it. And he would always say to me, I would just go, I would go, you're not like this hardcore punk rocker, are you? And he would go, oh no, you're mistaken. I crushed the system from within. And he would say, I am Wile E. Coyote. I crushed the system from within. And whenever he would say that, it would just make me laugh so hard because it was just so preposterous. And but I realized that, okay, he played in a hardcore band. When he was playing hardcore guitar coming out of a Marshall half stack, it did sound like he was going to crush the system from within. So when we were making this record, I was going to make sure that Giuseppe was nice and loud in the mix. And they had another guitar player, different than Davide this time, called Tommy. And Tommy was another straight up kind of metal guy. Sounded like he was more influenced by maybe Eddie Van Halen than Yngwie, but another guy who could just play like a monster, play these incredible riffs and stuff. If you listen to the record, Too Tough to Burn, you can hear Tommy's guitar playing on here, and it's crazy sounding. I can't play that way. But it was true to the tradition of having a metal shredder in a sort of crossover hardcore band, and it works on this record. And the drumming is super metallic drumming, and that sounds great also. So we had a really interesting and fun time making this record. And on a side note, the amount of money that I made making the record actually made me a millionaire in lira for a nanosecond. And so I can say I've been a millionaire. And it's quite something, that feeling. It's like 800 pounds or something like that. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to like and subscribe as it helps the channel grow. This week I actually hit 2,500 subscribers. So thank you to everybody who subscribed. over the past few months to make this grow. I have links below to my Bandcamp page, my Patreon page, which has exclusive content you cannot find anywhere else, and you can also buy me a coffee, which I would greatly appreciate because I do love coffee. There were a few interesting and fun side trips also, one of which, of course, was to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And there is a photo of me somewhere doing the classic tourist thing. And I didn't even really know what I was doing. But Ovi, who was the engineer, took me to, and the studio owner, said, "Oh, we have to go to the Leaning Tower of Pisa and you have to take the classic photo." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I thought it was going to be a photo up close, but we stood maybe 100 yards away from it or something like that. And he said, "Okay, hold your arm out, a little to the left, a little to the right." And I said, "What are we doing?" I didn't even know. And of course, it's the famous, you're holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So the photo is somewhere, I don't know where it is. Another trip was a trip to Puccini's house. And I knew that Puccini lived close to Pisa. And I had my Fodor's travel guide of Europe, which had an Italian section. I was and have been and still am a big fan of Puccini operas. And so I saw I was going to be in the vicinity, and I threw this out there to Ovi and said, "Hey, can we go visit Puccini's place?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, sure, of course." So we went over there, and I think there's a photo of me standing next to a statue of Puccini smoking a Toscano, just like he used to like to smoke. Incidentally, I think it was his undoing because he died of throat cancer. I think he smoked about 100 of these a day. True story. Anyway, got to Puccini's house, got to look at his house, which is an amazing place. He was an avid hunter. So it's probably got 500 skulls and antlers of tiny little deer. Maybe he wiped out the population. I'm not sure. The one other thing that happened when I was at Puccini's palatial mansion was typically Italian to me because they always seem to be arguing very passionately about whatever it might be, football, food, ladies. I don't know what the Italians are shouting about, but they're not actually angry. It's just kind of the way that they converse. And this was another one of the Italian things that I had to acclimate to. There's actually a room that's kind of like a miniature mausoleum. And he's actually in there inside this giant marble sarcophagus. I went into the room and I could hear this kind of loud, sounded like arguing to me. And there was two guys in there, obviously opera fans. One of them was leaning against the actual sarcophagus that Puccini was in, and the other one was just in front of him, and they were having this big conversation. It sounded like a heated argument, but I was asking the guy that I was with, Ovi, who was the owner of the recording studio, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Oh, they're having a discussion about who the best soprano was that played Tosca in the famous Puccini opera Tosca." And to me, this was just amazing and just kind of a quintessential Italian experience to have two opera fans arguing about who was the best Tosca, more or less oblivious to the fact that one of them was just leaning on the crypt of Puccini. So this was kind of a great way to round out that experience. And it's very vivid in my mind and was just a really cool thing to do. And I appreciated you taking me out there. So thanks, Ovi, if you're out there. Going back to Raw Power's influence in the 1980s, I think that first American tour that they did was influential to a lot of bands. And certainly when they came out to California, and there's flyers out there that you can see of them playing with other bands that I had actually produced, such as RKL and Poison Idea. So they were definitely right in that hardcore group of people and probably played with a lot of hardcore bands nationwide on that tour, I would imagine. So they were definitely influential as far as their power and their commitment to hardcore. And that commitment has stayed throughout their 41-year history, incredibly, at this point. They've had probably almost as many different band members as Canned Heat at this point. And if you go to Wikipedia and look at their page, there is a lot of people that have played in Raw Power, but it was mainly Mauro and Giuseppe's band up until when Giuseppe died. And now Mauro is the only original member of Raw Power, but he still keeps the spirit going. And I think they even toured the US maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't manage to be able to see the show. But if they come back, I hope that you guys will get in touch. And I would just like to say hi to Davide and Fabiano, who played on the first record that I worked on, Mind to Kill, and also to Tommy and Andrea and Alessandro and Mauro, of course, and RIP to Giuseppe. And that kind of wraps up my little talk about Raw Power and my experience with them. Also, I dug out a really cool rehearsal video of them. I think they're in the early 90s, and I'm providing a link to that below if you want to check out what they sounded like right around the time that I produced the first project for them that I did. And I'm going to put links below to everything Raw Power related. So check that out, and thanks for spending time here.